Is it more or less, or more or less the same? The US troop presence in Europe, particularly Poland. There have been weeks of conflicting statements from the Trump administration about reducing America's military footprint here. Now confusion over a boost. Here's the NATO chief.
Of course, I welcome the announcement. Our military commanders are working through all the details, but of course I welcome it. But let's be clear. The trajectory we are on, which is a stronger Europe and a stronger NATO, making sure we will, over time, step by step, be less reliant on one ally only, as we have been for so long, which is the United States.
Terry Schultz has been covering NATO for years and just returned from that doorstep with the NATO chief and foreign ministers who are meeting today. Philip Bednarczyk is head of the Warsaw office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, a nonpartisan group for advancing transatlantic ties. He's also worked for the US House of Representatives, Foreign Affairs Committee and for the EU. Let's first take a look at the surprising post from the US president. Based on the successful election of the now president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, who I was proud to endorse, and our relationship with him, I am pleased to announce that the United States will be sending an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. This has caught European and American officials off guard. Philip, can you clarify what's happening?
I cannot clarify what's happening, but apart from what's written by President Trump, but nevertheless, I can tell you a bit about the reception here in Warsaw and the efforts that brought us here to this statement, and that includes phone calls, delegations, informal and some formal efforts here in Warsaw, who are still holding on to the transatlantic relationship, particularly the relationship with Washington, as the most important ally. As NATO transforms itself into a more European-led alliance.
So tell me, these extra troops all of a sudden for Poland, are they coming from Germany, which is losing 5,000, or will the delayed deployment of this brigade to Warsaw be reversed, or is there something else at play here?
I'll say this, after the announcement or statement by President Trump, there was a bit of a celebration, a sigh of relief, perhaps, within the backdrop of this confusion. And then there was scratching for details, which have yet to emerge, and no one really knows if it's plus 5,000, if this reflects anything to do with the pause in the aforementioned rotation, or if it's plus 5,000 on top of the roughly 10,000 troops that are already stationed in Poland. So post-celebration, post-sigh of relief, no one really knows what's next.
OK, well, some Polish officials are saying this is going to even out. Terry, you asked the Swedish foreign minister an important question. Let's listen in.
Overnight, President Trump reversed the decision, apparently, to pull troops or to stop a rotation to Poland, and now says they'll put 5,000 back in. How confusing is that for allies, that you don't really know what the U.S. contingent is going to be, especially as you're deployed in Latvia? So this makes a big difference along the front line where you are also posted.
Well, it is confusing, indeed, and not always easy to navigate. I guess you feel the same as I do. But we need to continue to focus on what we do and not what everyone else says. So we need to continue to invest in our own defense and our own capabilities. We need the US to stay involved, but it's also natural that as we ramp up, they also reduce a little of their presence in Europe. I welcome if they increase their presence in Poland, since it's on the eastern flank where we have the big threat, just like you said.
Terry, what about the reality here? Don't there have to be consultations before decisions like this are made?
Well, that's the idea. That's not how it's been working out, even though you will hear allies and particularly Secretary General Rutte calling this structured and, planned decisions. Definitely the allies have not been consulted either before this announcement that there would be 5,000 troops pulled out of Germany or the restoration of the troops to Poland. But we should break down those numbers a little bit, because even listening to this again, I think it must be very confusing for people to follow. And we don't know everything for sure, as Phil just said. But, this original announcement from Trump that he was withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany as some sort of punishment for statements he didn't like from the chancellor, that actually turned out not to be the case. There are not 5,000 troops even planned to be withdrawn from Germany after that announcement. It turned out to be this rotational deployment to Poland that was actually on the line of some 4,000. What actually is happening is that there is a deployment of long-range strike capabilities that President Biden had promised Germany that will not be delivered by the Trump administration. And officials at NATO say that this may amount to sort of the other 1,000 that would make up that 5,000 person deployment. But at the same time, they were very adamant that this was not going to punish Poland because, of course, that is a model ally that spends, the most of any NATO ally. So it is very confusing, these numbers. And, of course, the other allies don't know how to perhaps rebalance their own forces, their own resources based on being able to count on the United States. So it's really just a mess. And this morning at NATO headquarters, at the ministerial here in Sweden, after this overnight tweet from Donald Trump, they're trying to make it true by celebrating this idea that 5,000 more troops are coming to Poland, but nobody knows if that's actually going to happen.
Again, just for some context, there are about 80,000 US troops stationed in Europe. The Pentagon's required to keep at least 76,000 soldiers and major equipment as well stationed in Europe unless NATO allies are consulted, and there is a determination that such a withdrawal is in US interests. Let's just have a listen to the response from the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Obviously, the United States continues to have global commitments that it needs to meet in terms of our force deployment, and that constantly requires us to re-examine where we put troops. And this is not a punitive thing. It's just something that's ongoing, and it was pre-existing, all these recent reports and tensions and so forth.
So echoing what you were just saying there, Terry, and also this is, as I mentioned, about hardware, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the bigger concern. I mean, Europe can make up a number of troops. And besides, what they were talking about are troops that were added to the U.S. European presence after Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. And the U.S. made clear at the time that they would not stay forever. So that was really less of a concern, particularly for Germany, than the fact that they will not be sending in these missiles and interceptors that they had very much hoped to get after an agreement with the Biden administration. And I actually asked Foreign Minister Vadaful this morning at the doorsteps whether, having seen that Poland apparently successfully reversed a decision not to send further forces into Poland, whether they were considering, perhaps stepping up German lobbying to try to reverse a decision on that. And it was interesting that he said, yes, we are. The negotiations are ongoing. And I hadn't heard that before. So it may be that Germany is looking at the Polish success, evident success, with this decision on forces and really trying to convince the Trump administration that it's in their interest to put these long-range capabilities in Germany.
Philip, I see you nodding away there. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, I'm just nodding a bit about the lobbying efforts, because there are different ways to approach the U.S. and Washington nowadays, and lobbying in different manners do work. It's maybe a new space where diplomats are not used to operating, but politicians, other businessmen, and national leaders should lean in non-traditional ways to perhaps get traditional wins in the national security space. And it seems to have worked for Poland today.
What I also wanted to add was that the
But just
US...
to go back, Ben, for one second.
Sorry.
So I just wanted to go back to something that Secretary Rubio said, that which you played there before he got on the plane. He said that, these decisions were not punitive and that they were, in the works for a long time. That, again, goes against what President Trump said when he made this announcement about the supposed 5,000. He definitely tied that to comments from Chancellor Merz. So, again, it just adds to, the difficulty in following what the United States is planning to do and why it's doing it.
And that was
sorry
because
to interrupt, but I just thought we
Merz
should,
had said that the US didn't have a plan when it comes to Iran. The US has said a planned deployment of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Germany will no longer go ahead. I wanted to just add a bit of context here, and it also plans to tell NATO allies it will shrink the pool of military capabilities the US makes available to the alliance in a crisis. Philip, where would Europe be without Poland at the moment, which has been doing so much when it comes to the Ukraine war?
Yeah, or where would Poland be without the U.S. Indeed? But I think looking from Warsaw, you bring up MATS and the Tomahawk missiles. I think from Warsaw, it's tempting to look at this in a zero-sum manner. So more troops for Poland, whatever it may be, 5,000, 4,000 on top of the 10,000 is good for Poland, yes, but it should be taken in context for broader European security, NATO security, but also, as mentioned, Russia's continuous war in Ukraine next door. So while we could celebrate as we wait for the details of what this announcement means, I think the Poland in Europe and maybe carrying some water for Europe in today's White House is good news for Europe. But hopefully it's also good news for Ukraine.
Okay, let's just bring up a tweet from the Polish president, because you can bring this down to a hectic US administration, I guess, or bad communication between Washington and Warsaw. But this creates uncertainty and questions the US's reliability at the end of the day. Still, Nawrocki had this to write: "I stand and will stand guard over the Polish-American alliance, a vital pillar of security for every Polish home and all of Europe. Good alliances are those built on cooperation, mutual respect, and care for our shared security. I thank the President of the United States, Donald Trump, for his friendship toward Poland and for the decisions whose practical impact we see very clearly today. The security of Poland and the Poles is my top priority." Philip, is that wishful thinking from Poland, or is there mutual respect at play here, which I just happen to miss somehow?
I think it's a bit of both. There's a bit of wishful thinking, and there's plenty of mutual respect. I think even in Polish society, where trust in the U.S. has fallen quite starkly, it still exists, and it's still a political winner for the a broad range of politics, but especially for President Nawrocki, who used a timely visit to the White House in his election campaign, who uses his warm relations with the White House to not only bring himself some political capital, but also use it as well. And hopefully, I think that, as combined with the government, so Prime Minister Tusk's efforts and foreign minister's efforts in perhaps a more formal diplomatic manner, plus President Nawrocki's warm public statements and personal connections to the more MAGA part of the Republican Party, is helpful in this space for Polish interests.
But Phil, whatever the actual numbers are, as an American and as a Pole, how do you feel about the US stepping away from its role as the world's policeman?
I'll say this. Sitting in Warsaw and seeing statements from the White House, some warm statements sometimes, or summit, whether it be the summit in Alaska with President Putin, warm statements towards Moscow. That's very confusing and difficult to understand sitting in Warsaw as a Polish American. Also, I know for Warsaw and as we saw the attack, the war on Iran unfold, with people also being kept in the cold here. President Trump's statements about allies and their role in Iraq and Afghanistan, that is painful for Poles who yes, understand that America is changing its role in the world and also in Europe, but they take this alliance very seriously, understanding that things are changing quickly, but that model ally, it may be a phrase, but it's quite personal here in Poland, not only with the lives they paid, with the political capital they still pay, but also the decisions they make on a daily basis, and that runs deep, and that's fraying a bit. And so we've been surprised by comments before from the White House, whether it be I mentioned about Putin, the war in Iran, also the drone incursion that was met with a bit of confusion from the White House, thinking that it may not have stemmed from Moscow. We'll take the good news today.
Okay, Phil. Terry, what's it mean for allies who've long relied on the US for defense guarantees?
You know, you mentioned briefly a meeting that's happening today that actually may tell us more. And this is something it's really under the radar, because this is at the meeting of defense policy directors. Those are quite a way below. I mean, they're advisors to defense ministers, but it's not like you have a ministerial with cameras on it and public statements. So what's happening today at NATO headquarters is that the 32 defense policy directors are meeting, and there the United States is expected to spell out how it's reducing its presence And this is something that is not simply a rotational force. They are expected to say that they are actually reducing their contributions to the NATO force model. Now, this is the plan that stays in place in case NATO has to respond to a crisis, an attack on one of the allies. And it is very much dependent on U.S. capabilities and on things that will take the Europeans a really long time to replace. So we don't know exactly what's going to come out of that meeting, and they won't be announcing it because, again, you don't have a spotlight on this meeting, but we do know that it's taking place simultaneously with the ministerial, and we don't expect Rubio to speak to the press here today. So we can't ask him what they're saying, but it is going to, this could really sort of cut to the heart and make people take stock of what the U.S. is doing, even though they've warned them. That doesn't make it easier when the U.S. sits down at the table and says, okay, you're no longer going to have this American capability at your disposal. And as Phil mentioned, these countries that are model allies, those are usually the Baltic states, the Nordic countries, and Poland, spending a lot of money, putting their capabilities to good use. It really hurt them when they were the ones that actually would have suffered if this rotational force from the U.S. Were delayed or canceled, and that's why this it becomes an emotional political issue as well as really a logistical and security issue for these countries.
Well, Terry, you did get a response from the Polish Foreign Minister, Radek Sikorski. He had a crucial point to make in response.
Minister, it still makes it hard to plan, doesn't it, when you don't know what's true? When you don't know whether they're coming or going?
All's well that ends well. Thank you very much.
With the lack of U.S. predictability as an alliance or as Poland?
I think this makes Putin very uncomfortable. Thank you.
Terry, give us a bit more context there.
Yeah, so I mean, I was trying to. It was the first time that we've seen Radek Sikorski, of course, since the overnight social media message from President Trump. So I was really hoping that he would be able to clarify what the Poles had been told. I'm sure Philip would have liked it if we had a little bit more detail as well. He wasn't at all willing to do that. But you know, I think this could again fall under wishful thinking that it's making Putin nervous that they don't know whether these rotational troops are coming or going from Poland. I think that Putin may well be pleased with the amount of uncertainty that this creates within NATO, you know, that we're asking questions of these foreign ministers, not just about the threat from Russia, but the threat from divisiveness in the alliance, the threat from a lack of unity, from not being able to count on the traditional strongest and most resolute ally in NATO. I think President Putin might be a little more encouraged about that than about whether 4,000 or 5,000 troops come or go from Poland and the Baltic states.
But at least a bit of ambiguity. I mean, so far, everything that goes on in the West and between the West and Ukraine is talked about in open spheres. You know, there are very little surprises for Putin, aren't there?
I wouldn't say it that way. I think that some of these announcements have been surprises to the NATO alliance itself, and that's what is so uncomfortable. That you know they didn't know about the delay in the rotational forces, and they didn't know that that may be canceled, and we still don't know. And I think that it's not good for NATO. As somebody who's, as you mentioned, covered the alliance for a couple of decades, it's not good for NATO that we ask foreign ministers whether they can count on the United States, and they have to hedge their answers. Everybody is very nervous about this and really trying to paint it over. But you can definitely tell under everybody's brave statements that people are worried, and they don't think they can count on NATO in the same way as they always could.
So, Philip, Europe has to take greater responsibility for its own security, the big message here. But is this just a wake-up call or a serious threat to security, having the US pull out?
I think it's a series of shock therapy that Europe is going through. Sometimes it comes in the form of a statement from the president. Sometimes it comes in the form of vague messages or decisions and on support for Ukraine. But Europe's waking up to that, and Poland. I think Poland has been sober about this and less emotional about this because it has to be. And we see coming into the NATO summit in Turkey this summer, Poland's trying to put itself in a good place with the relationship in Washington as a European leader in the political and security space, but also as a new economic leader as well. But again, this continuous, as I called it, shock therapy, tests the alliance, and not necessarily in a healthy way. I don't think the allies should be the ones being surprised about these messages and decisions. I don't think the allies, and not least most the model ally, should be surprised about the decisions, even if they're good news stories. So that's concerning for folks here. As much as we'll celebrate this decision, it's still bizarre to get it as a surprise.
Phil, could I ask you? This one user has asked, does NATO need the US? They're unable to win a war. Another user writes, how much does NATO need a US that's already decided its commitment to Article 5 is transactional?
NATO needs the US, Poland needs the US, and I would argue the other way around, that the US needs NATO and the US needs Poland.
Terry, why is the United States unwinding its own global order, in your opinion?
Well, let's not forget that the U.S. says that it's a so-called global order. I'm thinking back to Marco Rubio's speech in Munich, which was seen as a bit warmer than J.D. Vance's the year before, but still was largely focused on what the U.S. would like to see Europe do to change its own, even in some cases, demographics. So the U.S. is not the U.S. under President Trump is not an adherent to global order. Even this morning, Marco Rubio spoke about the UN in a derogatory way, and these institutions, the UN, NATO, other multinational bodies are what Europe really counts on, what Europe believes in, and how Europe would like to see international policy continue to be made. So I think if you asked the Trump administration about unwinding the global order, they'd say good. It's difficult for Europe because, again, that's how they basically see international decision making at its best. But that's not how the United States sees it. So the U.S., again, thinking back to Rubio's speech, he said that sovereignty should trump so-called global order. And if you look at the Trump administration's decisions, they very much think that, they have the right and even the responsibility to make decisions based on their own interest over the interests even of very good allies.
Now, Phil, we mentioned some of these decisions sound like knee-jerk reactions, but what sort of timeline are we talking about here? Are we talking about the next weeks or months or years?
Well, that would be a detail that no one has information about. I think Polish diplomacy and the embassy in DC is pushing for that to be months, not years, because I think the fear here is that time, whether it be a rushed withdrawal of U.S. from Europe, would hurt Poland, and time is not on our side in that sense. And as I mentioned before, that where Poland and NATO needs the U.S. here, I think that time frame and whatever the troop number is at the end of the day, even if it remains at 10,000, I think clarity in that space is vital. And I think when we wake up from the good news, as we refer to this, the more troops in Poland, or the 5,000 announcement, I think the details may be sobering.
Well, NATO's top commander sought this week to reassure European allies about the recent decisions, saying that further drawdowns would stretch over years to give allies time to develop capabilities to replace them. I mean, a little bit of reassurance there from him, but could we see all this reversed by a future US administration and see none of this really come about, Phil?
Indeed, and I think that's me not knowing the answer, or foreign ministers not knowing the answer, members of Congress not knowing the answer to that. This ambiguity, yes, you can make an argument, keeps Putin up at night, but it also keeps the allies up at night when we can't explain to what sort of timeline this has, whether it be a smooth not a withdrawal, but a smooth move or motion towards NATO 3.0 as being described by the administration. So yes, the timing matters, whether it be months or years, but the manner that which it is implemented, and do we do this together as allies in the same room, or is it because of an emotional engagement with a leader that the U.S. happens to not like today? And that's difficult. And Terry brought up the multilateral, the global order, and these sort of things. I think Poland today in Warsaw does a good job in lobbying and pushing for these one-off instances in Washington. It has those connections and does good work. But as a member and as a large member of the EU, where a lot of its economic future and might and all these decisions are made, I think the U.S. approach to the EU also makes Warsaw quite nervous. And we talk about national security and the war in Ukraine, but the economic security and the European project that Poland benefited so much from is also is something that the U.S. may see as a problem with the global order, and that makes Warsaw and I think Poles nervous about America's role in the world.
Terry?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's not even ambiguity toward the EU from Washington. They actively attack it and antagonize the EU and continue with this idea that it was set up to damage or destroy the United States, which is, of course, not the case. So I think that everyone in Europe is worried about that. And again, I want to just reiterate that with regard to, quote, celebrating this last social media tweet, it has not been made clear at all whether these would be extra troops or whether they're simply not going to cancel a rotational force that was planning to come in. So in terms of getting extra troops, I mean, we may be talking about literally none. It would just mean that what was supposed to take place as of, a couple of weeks ago is still going to take place, and that rotational force is going into Poland. And we should also point out that it is not just Poland, it is also Lithuania and Estonia who have troops from this same force, and they're very much wondering whether, what this means for them, whether the cancellation still applies to their troops or whether the boost will apply to them. And I asked both foreign ministers this morning about this, and they chose specifically not to answer.
Phil, another question to you. Another couple users say best way to get back to the US is to scrap defense contracts with them, let them feel what happens when no one buys their weapons. Your reaction?
That one can make an argument to buy less of the U.S. or to hedge bets when it comes to delivery times. I think sitting here in Warsaw, model ally, there's also exist concerns about deliveries. Not so much reliability of the equipment or reliability of the contracts, but timing on deliveries right now having to do with the war in Iran and the U.S. decision to put so much effort and kit towards that. And that also will have effect to the U.S.'s role in defending Taiwan if should it need be. So polls here, not so much out of a fit of emotion or unreliability in Washington when it comes to as a NATO ally, but more as just good business and proper strategic thinking in terms of deliveries and filling gaps where you have to. Poland has developed a robust relationship with South Korea in terms of purchasing tanks. Sweden when it comes to submarines. So it's good business, especially as Poland spends so much on defense. It's not the worst idea to spread some of the not the risk, but spread some of the business around when it comes to filling those gaps. But as the U.S. and U.S. companies lead the way on new technology and the changing nature of war, it would also be prudent in the same sense, prudent to stick with the U.S. in that space. We're learning a lot from Ukraine, of course. So Ukraine's entering the space in terms of drone technology, but the U.S. and some of that technological leaders are also, they should be in Poland and should be a part of the NATO menu.
I've been learning a lot from both of you today. Phil, thanks so much for your time. Terry, to you as well from that NATO meeting. For me, the best comment I read when we last covered this topic was, It's kind of sad to hear that other countries stop sending soldiers to your or neighbouring countries is considered a punishment. We can continue the discussion, of course, online. What do you think about the shifting geopolitical landscape? Does Europe or NATO need the US or the other way round? I'm Ben Fazulin, looking forward to hearing from you.